pocket, just the usual pipe replacements. Down in the maze, you're surrounded by a ton of background noise, right? Vibrating pipes, chunky old HVAC units, dripping condensation. You kind of get used to it after a while. On this day, however, something was off. Deep in the heart of the labyrinth, I could hear an eerie, watery echo. A thump. It was strangely methodical, like a gutter filling and emptying in a storm. It was unsettling. It made all my instincts scream danger into my ear. Yet, I convinced myself it was just another wonky pipe, making all that noise and the smell. Ah well, the stench was dreadful too, like spoiled meat left in a plastic bag, mixed with what smelled like wet dog and a burning rubber sort of smell. I sure did have my reservations, but you don't usually get to talk back in my line of work. So I did what I always do. I pushed on. I followed the source of the sound, shouldering past bundles of cable, climbing over thick slices of reinforced concrete. This facility was like a rabbit warren, twisting and turning in all directions. And then, suddenly, it ended. There was this sealed, unmarked door. And being a naturally curious guy, and also the one who wasn't exactly keen on ignoring this mysterious clanging sound, I needed to check what's behind it. I pulled out my master key card. Now, remember, Donovan, I'm just a plumber, but I've been working with these government guys long enough to know that most of the time, access is all about status, and there are few things in this world that can't be overridden by a little hard work and some networking. Ah, screw it. I nervously swiped the card. The green light flickered. The door beeped and opened. And, well, it's like walking into a nightmare, you know. I was suddenly standing on the threshold of a monstrous pit, all steel and concrete, and right in the center was a cage. Not really a cage, more like a containment cell. I'll admit it, Donovan, I was scared. It was the kind of tight, gnawing fear that folds you up small and just leaves you there. I had worked in this facility for weeks, thinking of it as just another job. Now it felt like a horror story. That's when I saw it. I'm a big guy, Donovan, easily scrimmaging around 200 pounds. But the creature I saw in that cell would have towered over me even if it was crouched. It was huge, maybe 7, 8 feet. It was difficult to tell, particularly when you're scared. The thing was, it was standing upright. Not like a bear, but more human-like, all hunched and bulky with it. It was dark in there. The lighting inside the cell was barely functional, flicking on and off. Yet, I managed a glimpse of it. Its body looked like a perfect mix of hyena and man. Long snout, demonic-looking face, and earthy, musky dark brown fur covering it. The strength it exuded was obvious. A big chest, wide shoulders, just impeccably terrifying. And the sound it made, like a guttural growl, but low, very, very low. Panicked, I punched a button, and the door came slipping shut. I stumbled backward, tripping over my gear, trying to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. I didn't go back to work after that day. I didn't even collect my stuff. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just left. I left the creature, the Dogman, behind me in that pit of hell. Probably they wondered what happened to that contractor who suddenly vanished one day. But the memory of that chilling encounter stayed with me every single night. I thought about reporting it to authorities, but who would have believed me? Yeah, I met a werewolf in a government facility. You guys should look into it. That story might make for a great movie, but to me, it is a grim reality. Faced with the fact that such a creature exists, and that our government is covering up its existence, made me feel incredibly small in a world I thought I understood. So Donovan, that's why I decided I should share this on your show. I don't know the truth about that creature, whether it was a test subject or something found in the wild. All I know is that it felt like a dark secret that we all have a right to know. Who knows how many of such creatures are lurking around captive in secret spots, away from human reach, controlled for God knows what purposes. The truth is, we don't exactly know what's out there, but it's time we find out. It's time we know the truth. That's my story, Donovan. Do with it what you will. So, I have a strange story. It's about something I encountered in the woods outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, that I never felt right keeping to myself. Now, I'm a retired widower, and there isn't much to do when the rest of the world's turned in for the night. It gives me time to spend with Daisy, my bloodhound. After decades spent wrestling with the daily grind, these days I'm much more interested in the call of the wild, the quiet of nature. So, Daisy and I took to spending our days in the woods, training in survival skills. You know, building a shelter, starting a fire without a lighter, those sorts of things. Hours turned into days, days into weeks, and weeks into months in those woods. Daisy and I were working on setting up camp. She'd fetch me sticks for the fire, tail wagging all the while, and I'd made a makeshift shelter and a circle of rocks for the fire. I was just about to start working on gathering kindling when a low growl rumbled through the calm late afternoon. I straightened up, glancing down at Daisy. She stood frozen, ears pricked up, her tail hanging straight. I'd never seen her act like this, not in all our time out there. I figured it was probably a deer or something. You know, the woods are full of animals all minding their own business. But Daisy didn't relax. Her growl grew deeper, her eyes fixed on something in the tree line that I couldn't see. I squinted into the deepening darkness, feeling the first prickle of unease. Beads of sweat started trickling down my back, hot and sticky. But it wasn't the humidity. There was something about the low rumble in Daisy's throat, a rare hostility in her eyes, that made me uncomfortable. Then I heard the movement of leaves in the distance, a twig snapping, the thunderous rush of something big moving quickly, too quickly, through the underbrush. I remember a smell. It was a whiff of something foul. It hit me like a strong gust of wind, a nauseating combination of fetid swamp and sulfur. I didn't know what was there, and let me tell you, I couldn't have guessed if I tried. All I could do was trust that Daisy sensed danger, and Lord knows she hasn't ever been wrong about this sort of thing before. All my senses were alert, but nothing could prepare me for the looming figure that stepped out of the shadows. Enhancing the mystery of it all, what I saw in that moment was hard to understand, let alone describe. It was tall and stood, I'd swear to anyone, at least 6 feet. It blocked out the remaining daylight, ink black against the setting sun. Its body was muscled, almost skeletal, and there was, God, how can I put it, a bizarre scariness to it as it rustled and shifted. It was like a dragon maybe, or a bat. Its glow-in-the-dark eyes were fixed on me, burning with intensity like the hot embers of a raging fire. It was at that moment I realized that Daisy and I weren't alone. I could hear the thing breathing, taking deep, raspy breaths that seemed to echo eerily through the clearing. I can't tell you what it looked like, not properly. It was the most peculiar creature, like nothing I'd seen on Animal Planet or in any of the zoos. Daisy's growl was the only thing that felt reassured, and just when a part of me wanted to bolt, something else held me rooted to the spot. A strange sense of fascination, or was it fear? It's hard to say. I got to my feet, clutching onto Daisy. That's when the beast roared. I say roared because it wasn't like any animal noise I'd ever heard. It was a blood-curdling, raspy hack. It was like something ripped straight out of the pits of hell. Still, consider me foolhardy, but I held my ground. Daisy was shaking like a leaf, but she was meticulously trained and didn't run. I wanted to get a better look, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I discerned a sort of exterior skeleton. Its body was a horrid blend of animal and goblin-like features, with a tint of something eerily human. Its face seemed twisted into a semi-permanent sneer of ridicule, or maybe just sadistic pleasure. The eyes were not the soft, luminescent dots they first appeared to be. They were glowingly malevolent, like twin fiery orbs. Its body, long and skeletal, glistened with a dark, almost scaled skin. I saw something that seemed a cross between bat-like wings and a lizard's body. The defining moment was when it unfurled its colossal hawked legs, making its entire figure stretch to nearly 10 feet. And there, protruding from its skull, were 2 grotesque horns. Our gaze met. Then, faster than my mind could comprehend, the creature lurched towards us. I reacted instinctively, pulling Daisy and running towards where I thought our camp was. Behind me, I could hear the frenzied beast giving chase. The way Daisy was growling at it, I knew the danger was as real as it gets. We reached the makeshift camp, got in our rusted pickup, and raced out of there. The creature had halted at the edge of the forest line, its unwavering eyes glowing ominously in the light from the tail lamp of the vehicle. As I drove away, I watched it watch me through the rear view mirror until it was just a blip against the landscape. I spent many nights after that, staring out into the dark, gnawing on my nails and wondering if what I'd seen was real. The thought kept me awake more often than not. Daisy was upset for a while, but soon got back to her playful self. But even she couldn't erase the disquiet that had settled in me. Weeks later, I met an old hunter at the local watering hole who used to explore those very woods. When I related my story, there was neither disbelief nor mockery in his eyes. Instead, he whispered something that made goosebumps break out onto my flesh: Jersey Devil. According to him, this creature has been seen by only a handful of the residents over the years. But who knows? What I do know is that from that day on, I had my tales to tell. Would I ever go back? Probably not. But the forests with their enticing wilderness still hold an eternal allure to a man like me. For however terrifying the encounter was, it reminded me of the mystery that's the world we live in. I really think that others need to hear this tale. So I wanted to share something a bit offbeat, a personal incident that happened to me a couple of years back in the quiet city of Burlington, Vermont. Now, I'm not much of a talker or storyteller, but trust me, this is something worth sharing. One of my favorite leisure activities is bird watching. You may find it boring, but I've got to tell you, it's the perfect blend of science and magic. So it's midsummer, and I am heading out to the lake for an early morning bird watching session. The morning's crisp weather was refreshing, and I felt the jitters of excitement and anticipation that come along every time I head out with my binoculars in hand. The birds were lively and chirping, and I was listing down species, making mental and paper notes. I spotted an oriole, a sparrow, a couple of robins enjoying the day, and even a blue jay. However, there was something unusual in the air, a pungent, musty smell that I could barely describe, almost like skunk spray. It was strong, and felt incredibly out of place for such a lush, beautiful spot. I remember shrugging that off, reasoning that nature can be a little wild sometimes. A few hours into my observation and jotting routine, I hear this deep, low growling sound echoing about the peaceful lake. It wasn't a bird's chirp, that's for sure. It wasn't even a sound I'd ever associate with any of the animals I've familiarized myself with over the years. It was a rough, guttural sound, like some massive creature was clearing its throat. And then, there was this ridiculous shaking amongst a thicket of trees nearby. I saw the bushes and branches sway with some considerable force, making it clear that whatever was creating that sound was pretty dang big. The birds went silent, tucking into the trees as if on cue. Now, I won't pretend I wasn't scared, because I was. But curiosity has a way of overruling fear, doesn't it? So, I crept closer, camera in hand, praying that it would be a deer or something more familiar. But what I saw, bloody hell, I wish I could simply describe it. But I'll just set the scene for you as best I can. I was looking at a thing with a broad, hunched-over back, no discernible neck, and large shoulders that gave it a linebacker's profile. Even hunched, it had to be well over 6 feet. Tangled shreds of brown and reddish hair stuck out in patches, akin to a bear with a bad hair day. All I was thinking at that moment was the simple truth of, boy, I don't think I've seen anything like this before. As I slowly approached this creature, my heart pounded in my chest. I could feel fear ripple through me, but still I pressed on. I might have made a murmur of a sound because it turned to face me. Suddenly, I was staring into the beady black eyes of a creature from another world. I say creature because, quite frankly, I have no good name for what I saw. This wasn't just an outlandishly large bear. I mean, sure, it was like a bear in many ways, but with a strong brow ridge leading up to a cone-shaped head. You could liken it to a Neanderthal of sorts, but much, much scarier. Its face had whiskers bridging the gap between its strong, pronounced lips and bridged nose. It was built like a professional football player, buff, heavily muscled, and incredibly large. And for one terrifying moment, it almost seemed like this thing was appraising me just as I was appraising it. The creature gave another one of those deep, rumbling sounds, making my skin prickle. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted away, sprinting much faster than I ever have in my life. I made it back to my car, heart pounding a samba in my chest and my hands shaking. I didn't look back. I just got inside the car, turned the ignition on, and drove away as fast as I could. Let me tell you something. It took me a whole lot of courage to walk back into those woods again after that. And bird watching hasn't been the same since. Each rustling leaf, each unknown animal call always takes me back to that encounter. It was a harrowing experience, to say the least. Later, when I shared my experience with a buddy, initially he just told me I'd probably just run afoul of a sickly bear. I think he was being nice and trying to make me feel better. But when I gave him the details, he started listening more seriously. He said he'd heard of a similar incident from another person from Burlington who was an avid hiker, but he didn't believe it at the time. So now I count the creature among the remarkable sights I've seen on my walks. I only wish I'd had the presence of mind to take a photo. But then again, even without one, I don't think I will ever forget what I saw that day in the woods of Burlington. So that's my story. Do with it what you will. I'm still not quite sure what it was I encountered that sunny day in Asheville, North Carolina. It's the kind of place where you can't help but feel small, surrounded by a vast open sky and the age-old mountains. It was perfect weather for a mountain bike ride. Little did I know, I was about to experience something that would deeply affect me. I've always been an adrenaline junkie, and mountain biking has been my poison of choice for a number of years now. There's just something so liberating about tearing down dirt trails, your heart pounding in your chest, your bike thrashing beneath you. And Asheville, with its sprawling mountain ranges, had always been on my biking bucket list. The day started just like any other perfect mountain biking adventure. I was pumped, my senses heightened, throttling down one of my favorite trails, a scenic ribbon of dirt and rocks and roots, twisting along the side of the mountain. The trail followed the line of the mountain. It was a perfectly molded single track paired with breathtaking views. The sweet tang of pine, the cool mountain air, the sunlight filtering through the trees. It was exactly my definition of paradise. But then, something shifted. Have you ever had that feeling where something just feels off? That's exactly what it felt like. I took a break from my ride to take in the surrounding beauty and to hydrate. The sun was hanging low, and the sinews of evening light were beginning to suffuse the edges of the sky. That's when I felt it, a creepy sensation prickling up my spine, an undercurrent of something not quite right. I shrugged it off as the setting day playing tricks on me, and was about to mount my bike again when I heard it, a rustling somewhere behind the tree line. The rustling grew louder, more deliberate. The hair on my neck stood on end, and my stomach churned. As a biker, I'm not a stranger to wildlife or their sounds. Yet this felt different. The rustling seemed to morph into a low, sickening groan that echoed around the subdued forest. An earthy, musky smell quickly followed. It was pungent, and quite unlike anything I'd smelled before. It was almost nauseating. Stumbling backward, my eyes darted through the dimming woods to the source of the noise. There it was, or rather, there it wasn't. Nothing was visible. I could only sense the menacing outline of something indistinct, something existing mostly in my mind, fueled by my fear and its strange, heavy presence. The shadow seemed to come alive. Its presence seemed to show itself and then disappear. And yet, every nerve in my body screamed of its undeniable existence. I strained my ears, hoping to pick up any familiar sound that might explain the mystery. But what followed next was anything but familiar in the woods. It was a soft, eerie laughter. Unease swelled within me. I knew I wasn't alone, but identifying what was with me was trickier. My instincts told me to get the hell out of there, but my curiosity rooted me. With every passing moment, the events around me were getting stranger. Desperate to retain my sanity, I decided to confront it, whatever it was. Standing tall, I called out. I tried to sound brave, but my voice echoed back from the woods. What was happening? What was this unseen presence plaguing my adventure? And why did it feel like my life was about to change forever? Suddenly, a figure emerged from the dark veil of the forest, emanating an uncanny aura that was filled with dread. My breath hitched in my throat as I tried to make out the silhouette. It was tall yet unnaturally slender. Its body seemed fluid-like, shifting and twitching unnervingly. It had a peculiar gait that was both intriguing and terrifying. I felt like a deer caught in headlights as I squinted to get a better look, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. A sudden flash of golden lights pierced the thickening dusk. Its eyes, glowing in a vivid shade of gold, bore into mine. Hanging in midair, they looked surreal, revealing nothing about the creature. It was then that I heard it, a sound so out of the blue that my mind struggled to make sense of it. An uncanny mimicry of my own voice repeating the words I had just shouted. My blood ran cold at the sound. It felt like the forest was whispering back to me in my own voice. Without thought, my body finally submitted to the rush of adrenaline. I yanked my bike off the ground, jumped back on, and pedaled away as hard as I could with the strange creature's gaze boring into my back. Not daring to glance back, I focused on the trail ahead, leaning into the bike and relying on my muscle memory to navigate the familiar terrain. By the time I broke out of the tree line and onto open ground, it was starting to get dark. I didn't stop until I could no longer hear the blood pounding in my ears, until a comfortable distance separated me from the strange presence I had left behind. As I look back at that encounter now, my memories are filled with unease and unanswered questions. Was it real? Was it a guardian of the mountains? Or an entity with more sinister motives? Obviously, I had emerged from the encounter unharmed, but I couldn't shake off the lingering sensation. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Yet the memory of that encounter kept me awake on most nights. Each time I rode my bike through the mountains, I could feel its unseen gaze upon me. I couldn't ignore the soft rustling of leaves, the unnatural sounds that echoed amongst the quiet mountains. For in the end, we are all just wanderers, getting lost in our adventures to find who we truly are. And hopefully we can all see what the world actually is. So, I've got a story for you that's sure to send some chills down your spine, no matter how cozy you might be feeling at the moment. This one is from my cross-country skiing escapade in Wyoming that I cannot seem to forget. This took place many winters ago, when I had decided to take off from work for a week and indulge in my passion for cross-country skiing. I love the solitude and the rhythm that you fall into, the sensation of being one with nature. Born and raised in Cheyenne, Wyoming, the local landscapes were my playground since I was a child. I remember setting off early that day. The sun was just shy of touching the horizon, and the pristine snow was untouched. The wind cutting against my face, the rhythm of the skis beneath my feet, and the faint crunching sound was all part of this winter symphony that I cherished. As I glided along my favorite skiing territory, I felt something different that day. The air had this particular chill, not the usual winter cold that I was acquainted with. It was eerie, a bit unsettling. Despite having traversed these paths for years, something seemed off, significantly enough to make the hairs at the back of my neck stand. I shrugged it off initially, attributing it to the unusually harsh winter that year. I continued my path, the skis slicing through the thick blanket of snow, my breath appearing as small clouds before me. While I was lost in the rhythm, a sudden whiff of something strange caught me off guard. It was a mix of different odors: wet dog, the nauseating smell of garbage, and something else that I could not quite point out. Ignoring this odd change in scenery, I proceeded on my path. The skies were gradually turning from orange to blue, and the vast white wilderness had an ethereal glow. The feeling of unease was growing inside me like a gnawing pit in my stomach. contrasting sharply with the calm solitude of the landscape. All the while, the stench kept getting stronger, a fetid mix of rotting meat and a tinge of something like sulfur. It was so strong that I had to stop to gather myself. I looked around me, hoping to spot an animal carcass, anything to explain the smell. A sudden, deep, guttural sound made me snap my head around. The noise was of the wilderness. I strained my eyes to peer into the snow clouds that my skis had just kicked up. A sense of foreboding overtook me, the deafening silence serving as a harsh reminder that I was indeed very much alone. And what happened next was insane. I remember seeing a sudden movement from the corner of my eye. There was a figure that was definitely not human, standing where no living creature should be. Its silhouette was curiously off, as if it wasn't supposed to be there, yet it was. I squinted, trying to make out the obscurity, but it ducked behind a cluster of trees. I could see it pacing. Its predatory gait sent a fresh wave of chill creeping over me. Then the movement stopped, and I realized that it was observing me. Curiosity warred with fear in my mind as I let my eyes fixate on the place. I saw it emerge, almost reluctantly, its figure unclear against the snowy background. It was massive, towering at about 9 feet. There was a hump on its back that I couldn't understand. The creature had a dark coat that was a mixed meld of black and browns, and a mane around its neck that flowed down like a cloak. It stood upright, standing on its hind legs, which were eerily similar to human legs. But these were muscular, bulkier, and clearly powerful. Its face was demonic, a twisted version of a hyena's that housed a double row of teeth in its grotesquely long snout. The eyes gleamed. A low primal growl rumbled out from it, echoing ominously in the silent, wintry air. That was my breaking point. The sight, smell, and sound syncing together in a horrifying reality. I will never forget the surge of adrenaline that engulfed me. I turned on my heel, a frantic energy bubbling inside me, and took off at a pace I didn't know I was capable of. I could hear the sounds of my frantic heartbeat resonating in the haunting silence. I never looked back, not until I had crossed the threshold of my house, the safety of solid walls barricading me from the wilderness and its inhabitants. The memory of that encounter out there in the wilderness still lingers with me to this day. It is a haunting reminder of the reality we often ignore. The peace and serenity I once found in my skiing escapades have now been stained with this gruesome encounter. Every time I set foot in the snow, or feel the winter air seeping into my skin, I'm reminded of that eerie sensation and those hypnotic eyes watching me from afar. It's been years now, but every time I recall the incident, it unfurls in me a dread so cold and deep that it never fails to send shivers down my spine. I later was told that what I encountered was known as Dogman, but I'm not sure because I don't know enough about them. They said it is a creature from the twilight zone of humanity that continues to lurk in the shadows of our awareness. What do you think?